Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Dave, this past weekend was the 21st anniversary of 9/11. Do you remember? I was going to ask if you remember where you were. Of course you do.
Yeah.
Where were you on 9/11/2001?
So, man, we don't have time for this, but I have a really interesting story that actually will tie into what I wanted to talk about later.
Okay.
I was in bed. I usually woke up earlier. I was still in college. It was my last year of college.
So you were in Boulder?
I was in Boulder.
Okay.
I had been up late, really late the night before. I believe 9/11 was on a Tuesday, if I'm remembering correctly.
I don't remember. God, I don't remember.
I think it was a Tuesday. Okay. It was either a Monday or a Tuesday because, and I think it was Tuesday because the Broncos were playing on Monday Night Football.
Okay.
Or Sunday Night Football. So if it was a Monday, it was Sunday Night Football.
Right.
If it was a Tuesday, it was Monday Night Football. They were playing the New York Giants, right? So kind of interesting that this whole thing happens in New York. And I remember this game. I mean, this game has been burned into my memory. Ed McCaffrey, Denver favorite.
Yeah.
Ed McCaffrey was a receiver for the Broncos at the time. And sometime in the second quarter, Ed McCaffrey went up for a catch and he got undercut by the defensive back and snapped his leg in half. Literally, bone was dangling. I mean, it was disturbing.
Yeah.
I have never looked around Bronco Stadium, Mile High Stadium in my life and seen more tears.
Yeah.
It was silent. And there was a good 45-minute stop in the game because just they were taking care of Ed McCaffrey.
Right.
McCaffrey was also a former Giant. So he had come over from the Giants a couple years earlier.
So he had friends over
he
there.
had friends on the other team. The players were a mess. I mean, this was one of those things that it just messed with everybody at the game. Turns out to be a great game, and it started late on the East Coast. The game ends up going past midnight, Denver time, so 2 a.m. in New York. And to this day, they say that game might have saved the lives of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people who would have been in the trade centers that day.
But they stayed up so late
that they decided to go into work late the next day.
Wow.
I was sleeping in a little bit because I was at Mile High Stadium until late that night. And I didn't have an early class that day. And one of my best friends who I was living with at the time came down and knocked on my door and said, you should probably wake up and turn on the television.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I know everybody, who was old enough to remember, that's one of those moments in time where everybody remembers exactly where they were when they heard this. And then, almost everyone just went and watched the TV. I mean, what else was there to do but turn on the TV and try to figure out what was going on? I wrote a little piece on social media just as a kind of reminder that one of the fundamental questions that war raises, and I look at 9/11, that was an act of war, right? That was not just in fact, I remember George W. Bush. This is one of many things I disagreed with President Bush about. He wanted to describe these guys as criminals and say, we're going to go after those individuals for the criminal acts they committed. No, right. No. A criminal is someone who breaks into your house and steals a TV, right? That was an attack on the country.
Yeah.
And one of the fundamental questions of war is who's going to change? Somebody's going to change. Are we going to let our enemies change the way we live, make us change? Or are we going to fight back and make them change and make sure that they don't ever do anything like this again? This is one of the themes of my writings that came out of 9/11 and thinking about these things. And, and the sad truth is, I think many Americans said, let's change. We clearly made some people angry. So, we first of all, we started building this huge security apparatus at the expense of the civil liberties of Americans. So places like airports and many other places drastically changed, to the point where I think it's hard for young people today to imagine traveling before 9/11. You used to just be able to walk into an airport. You could walk right up to the gate. And,
Do you remember what that was? I mean, I still remember getting off an airplane and having a friend or a family
Waiting
member
for you,
waiting
right
for
there.
me right
Yes.
there, and to get up and give them a hug and to get to spend time with somebody, as opposed to, okay, I've got to go meet them in the drive up lane and we can't sit here too long, so we just got to go and we'll say hi or hellos in the car.
Here's the other big shift, and I think this is still we're still dealing with all the problems created by this. After 9/11, it really fueled this attitude of this desire to praise the lifestyles, the cultures of the people who attacked us, like openly praise it. In particular, Islam, with a particular, there's nothing, not only is there nothing wrong with Islam, we should be celebrating it and cheering for it. And don't let the acts of a few, bad apples in any way taint the reputation of this religion, when the truth is, the religion has all kinds of problems, both in its teachings and its history. But what many Americans, they started celebrating Middle East cultures, Islamic cultures, the cultures of the people who did this to us. At the same time, they started apologizing for our own.
Yeah.
Basically going around the world. Barack Obama did this as president of the United States, going around the world and apologizing to the rest. We're sorry that we Americans live the way we live, rather than standing up and say, we're Americans. We live freely and we don't let anybody, we won't mess with you as long as you don't mess with us. But if you mess with us, you're going to have a big problem on your hands.
You talk about that, and I'm reminded of Ron Paul's speech during the 2008, was it the Republican? No, he would have been running as a libertarian. So this must have been the presidential debate.
Yeah.
In 2008, it was Ron Paul, Barack Obama, and John McCain on stage. And Ron Paul sat there on stage and basically said 9/11 was our fault. 9/11 is the fault of the Americans for going and bombing Iraqis, for killing Iraqis, for setting up. And he made some valid points.
Right.
I am certainly not going to push back on the idea that the one point he made is we had established 18 military bases on Iraqi soil over 8 years. And he said, how would you feel if China was trying to build military bases on American soil without our permission? So I can get behind that. He made it sound as if he believed they would not have attacked us had we not been there and trying to install our systems of government and everything else. They hate Western culture. There was a hatred of Western culture, and they did these things regardless of whether or not we were there or not. They were going to keep attacking us.
Well, and there's a hatred of freedom. I mean, like any controlling power, whether it's in the name of science. So, some version of progressivism or fascism or socialism all the modern totalitarian tyrannies have been justified by the authority of science. We're going to have scientists managing, engaging in these social engineering projects. So whether it's science or it's the authority of a religion, those who want to control, the thing they despise most is the very idea of freedom. And people who absorb the idea of freedom, people who love the idea of freedom and want to live freely. And in that sense, right, the worst thing for some Islamic tyranny living under Sharia misery, the worst thing for them is a free, self-governing American constitutional republic, because some of the people being subjected by Sharia tyranny might look at that American model and say, man, we kind of like that. We would like some of that over here.
Well, and as we often remind the people who listen to our podcast, we do not, that wouldn't be the first time that happened. You go back to Tiananmen Square.
That's right.
They were sitting and reading the Declaration of Independence, and the Chinese government said, wait a minute.
Right.
You can't be thinking about things that way. You can't be thinking about freedom. That's We're going to put an end to it. The reason I brought up Ron Paul is it was an interesting spectrum of, you had these progressives wanting us to apologize for what we did overseas. You have these far libertarians,
right?
These people who really do believe in freedom, wanting us to say that, no, this was our fault. And then I think you have a lot of people who are left in the middle who really didn't know how to respond. I think there were a lot of us who said, yeah, we probably are doing some things over there that we shouldn't be. And we also recognize that there are some things that we have to be doing. And there are some things that are out of our control. The mere idea that we live free lives, or we choose to try to live free lives, is a problem for them. Then on the other side, and I was seeing all kinds of posts yesterday on social media about this, of all people, one of the biggest, most vocal conspiracy theorists of 9/11 was Rosie O'Donnell.
I don't remember this.
Rosie O'Donnell was on The View at the time.
Okay.
And Rosie O'Donnell went on The View and said, there is no way, it is scientifically impossible that those two planes took 3 towers down. Because remember, World Trade Center Tower number 7 also ended up collapsing. Yeah. And she starts talking, you can't melt steel. And this has been debunked by every engineer in the world, that it didn't have to melt the steel, that temperature would weaken the integrity of the steel enough that they would start pancaking, that the floors would start to pancake one into the other, and they were going to fall. And it happens at a lower temperature than it was probably even burning at. But she was the leader of the pack, saying this was a government conspiracy. The United States government did this. And now looking back, we didn't take her as this far left conspiracy theorist at the time. Right. Would she have said the same thing if it had happened under Obama or under Clinton? Or was it the mere fact that it was Bush and she didn't like Bush? Yeah. I just kind of look back and wonder now.
Well, in fact, it's a great question. I mean, it's a question I hope we don't have to answer, or we don't have an example. I'm not asking for something terrible like that to happen again. I'm just reflecting on the fact we're even more polarized. We're more divided today. How would America react to something horrific like 9/11 today? I don't know. I don't think it would be good. Also, and this, we don't want to make our whole podcast here about foreign policy. I just want to point out some of the comments you made. It really does put a spotlight on the great challenges of foreign policy. Mm-hmm. The fact that there is no easy way. There's no guidebook. There's no, what the teachers use. There's no teacher's edition, right? Where you look in and here are the answers. What do you do? I sympathize a lot with both the progressives and the libertarians who say we shouldn't be going around the world doing nearly as much as we've done. I sympathize a lot with that. At the same time, the world's a really dangerous place, and there are some people trying to do some horrific things to us and to some of our allies and friends. Should we have some presence? Should we be some places? Probably, but then you invite all kinds of problems, yourself. And so trying to make those judgments, right? Do we just sit at home and not bother anybody unless and until they actually attack us? But if we wait for them to attack us, will the attack be so devastating that maybe we don't recover, or we simply don't want to absorb that kind of attack? I mean, this dominated the mind of President Reagan through his administrations, because while human beings have all kinds of inventive ways to hurt each other, nothing posed the threat of an intercontinental ballistic missile equipped with nuclear warheads. Right. And so he was thinking this through. What do we do? And it's why he ended up so focused on some kind of missile defense system. He thought it was shameful. It was immoral to leave the Americans vulnerable about this. We may not be able to make everyone love us. We may not be able to stop everyone from attacking us, but if they shoot missiles at us, we're going to knock those things down. Right. That was his whole view about that.
Well, and I took a position during the time of 9/11, even before, as people were saying, should we really be in Iraq? Should we be involved in this? And I said the complex part in this is you have oil reserves that at the time were servicing the world, right? I mean, America was far from energy independent at the time. Right. We looked more like we do today than we did 4 years ago at that time. Yep. And we were heavily reliant on foreign oil. Those Iraqi oil fields, those Saudi Arabian oil fields, those Middle Eastern oil fields had to be protected. If they weren't, somebody was going to come in. Those countries were going at war. I mean, remember Iraq and Kuwait and Iran and Kuwait and all of these these different things going on in the early 1990s. And even before that, there were constantly battles over this oil, and it was driving up prices, and it was causing rare sources and things like that. And then we look at what just happened in Afghanistan.
Well, hang on, let me add in.
Okay.
One of the big concerns back then that people didn't talk about that much was an environmental concern, and it was real. It was legit.
Yeah.
When the Iraqis, for example, when they withdrew from Kuwait, you know what they did? Hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't remember for sure, but certainly hundreds of those oil rigs, those oil wells, they blew them up,
right,
lit them on fire, and said you had all these. I mean, this is raw crude oil, right? And it takes a lot to light crude oil on fire. It takes even more to put them out. That's not an easy, right? And they're burning this wretched smoke, belching it into the. I mean, it was a serious environmental catastrophe.
Absolutely. And the benefit of the United States being involved there, as much as I question how much we should have been, at least we kept some security around the world's oil supply.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, oh, well, they should have done it themselves. Iraq should have done it themselves. Well, let's look at what happened in Afghanistan after we just pulled out, a year ago? Joe Biden pulls all of our troops out of Afghanistan, and all of a sudden now all of the 80% of the world's reserves of lithium, one of the most important materials in the world today for batteries, for technology. And they said, well, if the United States isn't going to be here, somebody's got to handle our lithium mine. Somebody's got to protect them. Otherwise, we're going to get attacked by somebody else who wants it.
Right.
And who do they call? They call the Chinese. And they say, hey, China, the U.S. pulled out.
Right.
We can't trust that we're safe. We need security. Will you come and help us? And if we had left the Middle East entirely, we would have created a void that would have opened the door to a China, an Iran, a Russia, somebody like that, which is dangerous.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're talking about international things, sort of reflecting on the 21st anniversary of 9/11. And there's other big news in the international world. The Queen of England has died just recently at the age of, I think she was 96.
96.
Yeah, and she
didn't quite make it to Betty White.
How old was Betty White?
Betty White was 99.
99.
I saw a great meme that had America's Queen versus Britain's Queen, right, and it was Betty White and Queen Elizabeth, and it was talking about all the humanitarian work that they did and all the great things they did, and they said, but Betty White lived to 99, so she did it for 3 years longer. I appreciated that.
Betty White might have been one of the last few. I'm trying to think of someone or something Americans can actually agree upon, share, like in common. And I shouldn't even say this because I don't know much about Betty White or her personal life. I don't know that she had a bunch of enemies. I think a lot of different people of a lot of different backgrounds liked Betty White. She was a very funny woman.
Very funny. If you didn't like Betty White, you had some problems. I'm sorry, but she was great. I went back and watched some of those reruns of what was the
Golden
show?
Girls.
No, the game show that she was on in the early 70s, where you had to fill in the blank. Like there was a contestant, and then there were 8 celebrities who would give answers, and however many you matched with, you had to match with the celebrities. Right. And she would give the best answers. She was so funny at the time. I just got such a kick out of it. And she was beautiful. I mean, she was so stunning.
Yeah.
So I loved the meme.
All right, everybody. Dave prefers Betty White over Queen Elizabeth.
Well, and let's be honest. Queen Elizabeth did a lot of really good things for humanity. I am not trying to diminish any of the work that she did.
And I don't want to put you on the spot. So tell me if this is not a good thing to talk about. Is that true? I don't know that much about what Queen Elizabeth did. Is there general consensus that she did? I mean, I know she she refrained from doing many bad things,
right?
Especially at the international level that she could have. Did she do good things?
That seems to be the consensus. If you asked me, if you put me on the spot and said, what are those things? I don't really know.
Yeah.
I appreciate that she stayed in her lane in certain places.
Yeah.
And just said, I'm not getting involved in any of this. But she did have some very specific things that were her priorities. And They seem to be, I mean, there were some great shots of her before she was queen, getting involved in some of the things happening in World War II.
Yeah, served in World War II.
Served in World War II.
She wanted to go actually fight.
Right.
Her father wouldn't let her, but she still signed up, and she became a mechanic. She learned how to service diesel engines, and I think she drove an ambulance at one time. Like she did what she could do.
I did hear this week, speaking of her military service or her desired military service, one of her sons, there were the 4 sons. I think it's Prince Andrew is the one who was discovered to be spending a lot of time with Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay.
She stripped him of his naval rank. And so they've been doing their walkthroughs all week of taking the casket to all the different places. And all 4 boys, or 3 of the 4 boys, are in full naval regalia.
Not him.
And he is dressed in street clothes.
Interesting.
He is in a suit and tie.
I'm sure they're nice. I'm sure they're nice street clothes.
I'm sure they're very nice street clothes, but he is not allowed to wear. She took it away from him for his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, so that's one good thing she did.
I mean, let's see. So she became queen upon the death of her father, 1952.
Was it 52, 53?
So one of those,
something like that. I think
52. And I mean, what an amazing just stretch of time. I think one of the things many people today marvel at, especially here in the United States, because it's so unusual. The Queen of England seemed to be the one thing that English, I'm going to use the correct term, English subjects could agree on.
Mm-hmm.
When it was the Queen, right? You could have people, whether it's sitting around a dinner table or in official halls of legislation, if the parliament is gathered, people who disagree on all kinds of things. But as soon as someone toasted the Queen, everybody would pause what they were doing, and everyone had a kind of respect for the Queen. Didn't matter if you were rich or poor, white or black, man or woman, conservative, liberal, like those differences didn't seem to matter when it came to the Queen. And that just that phenomenon in itself today, when you look at how polarized everything is, that's kind of remarkable that she was able to pull that off. Now, she also had a lot of assistance, right? And she always had, was being driven around by chauffeurs and staying, and other people were paying all of her bills and everything. So she didn't have to worry about the normal challenges of life. But still, it is interesting. I think a lot of other people find that interesting, that she was more of a unifying phenomenon in England than a divisive phenomenon.
This is where I start getting confused.
Yeah.
And I don't understand people today. Maybe I should just stop trying to understand people today and the general hypocrisy of the world. I heard a British commentator talking about this, and he says, there are some Americans who just can't understand why, and he's talking about somebody like me,
sure,
can't understand why we're so upset and why the Queen was so important to us. And he said, to us, the Queen is like the flag. In the United States, like the United States flag.
Yeah.
In the United States, you sing the national anthem, you salute the flag, you do these things before football games and before all of these.
Well, we used to.
We used to, and I watched some football on Sunday, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
But he talks about it as if here's everything that's going on, or he talks about it as if you should appreciate her because she represents the United Kingdom,
right,
in the same way the American flag represents the United States,
right.
And I'm sitting here thinking, all these people who hate the American flag today, the Colin Kaepernicks,
sure,
and the members of Congress and this and that, who are the people out there who are just so angry at the American flag.
I'm curious. I would love for some of our listeners to respond and tell me if they agree with this. You have progressives, woke progressives who hate the flag with vitriolic hatred. And then you have tens of millions of ordinary progressives who just feel uncomfortable around the flag. This is something I've been watching for years. They're not going to grab the flag and throw it down the ground or burn it or anything like that. They might not even say anything. but they'll kind of raise an eyebrow. Like if they see someone with a flag, like, is that some kind of weird MAGA loving, Trump, part of the Trump cult? Like that kind of, rather than just, what's an American flag? That's nice to see the American flag. Nice to see people displaying the American flag. Yeah. That's not how progressives respond.
Like they did on September 12th, 2001.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
The day after 9/11.
Yes.
So he's explaining it this way. And I think about, what does the American flag represent? And the complete misconception about the national anthem. Colin Kaepernick's whole thing was that the national anthem, for people who don't know, there's actually more verses than we sing.
Sure.
And there is a verse in there that talks about slaves.
Right.
And for those who study the national anthem, he's not talking, the writer was not talking about African slaves.
Right.
He was talking about naval slaves who the British Army enslaved during the War of 1812 and put them on their boats and said, okay, now you're going to go fight back against your own country.
The practice was called impressment. Right. The British would impress these are U.S. sailors. They would pull over a U.S. boat under the American flag and they'd point guns at them, say, you're done. You're coming onto our boat and you're going to work for us.
Right. So there's this huge, and then you have the slavery issue and you have all of this, and they're talking about Americans as having this really bad history built on slavery.
Right.
And yet so many of these progressives are sitting and mourning the Queen.
Yep.
And I think about, if she is a symbol of the United Kingdom and she is a symbol of the monarchy and the monarchy's history.
Yeah.
Slavery.
It's not very pretty.
The colonization. I mean, you talk about they think America was this colonial country that wanted to go colonize the world.
Right.
We paled in comparison to what the British
actually did.
And then, I get a little frustrated with the Queen because she did like to stay out of certain matters.
Yeah.
She said in a speech in 1947, before she became queen, that she was going to stay out of political matters and that her goal was going to be to more focus on being of service to the country.
Right.
But at the same time, there were moments where I think she should have stepped up. And I will tell you, first and foremost, Israel is one of those. And maybe this is a personal issue of me towards the Queen.
Sure.
But you have people saying that Israel was taken from this group they call Palestinians. And you have a story for that. Maybe you can tell another time. I don't know. We'll have time for today. But I think about it. She could have very easily cleared up exactly what happened. She was around. Yeah. She was involved. She was involved in the war. She knew exactly what was going on. She was preparing to become queen. Mm-hmm. She became queen only a few years later. Step up, talk about it, tell people the real story. Why did you wait and not say anything the rest of your life on this earth to do that? And I just never really understood why she didn't want to get involved in those things.
You are right. There is I think it's a hypocrisy. It sure looks like hypocrisy. There's this large group of Americans who loathe their own country. They're embarrassed by it. And part of that embarrassment is the legacy of slavery. Somehow, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what progressives think about American history. One thing I'm confident is a lot of them, they don't bother to know history, but yet they want to emote about things they think happened in history. It's as if I think they feel that the Americans maybe invented slavery or made slavery worse or something like this, rather than leading this great charge to get rid of slavery. But regardless, they're embarrassed by America because of slavery, and they're embarrassed by contemporary America because, number one, there's what they see as the legacy of slavery, structural, institutional racism that they think persists today. And that coincides with this thing they really hate, which is privilege. This idea that some people have an easier way in life.
Right.
And other people face just various obstacles that others don't. And, when you glance over at the Queen of England, and you think, wow, talk about privilege.
Right.
I mean, if that's not the model of privilege, her whole way of life rests upon stolen money. Her government taxes people, takes money that they don't want to give up, just takes it by threat of force, and funds this very cushy, cozy life for her.
And her family took money and prevented people from owning private property. Her ancestors did for generations and generations and generations. This is a family that became as wealthy as anybody on the planet through seizure and through taking from people. They didn't do anything of value. They simply said, I'm sorry, God chose us to be better than you, and therefore you should give everything over to me.
Yep.
And if you don't, we'll kill you.
In Thomas Jefferson's, when he sat down, Jefferson was asked to write the Declaration of Independence. This is in the summer of 1776. They're in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress, and they know that they're going to vote on independence, and they want a formal declaration announcing to the world why and explaining. And so Jefferson is chosen to write the first draft. It's largely what we call the Declaration of Independence today. It did have a number of important revisions and edits. It went through, I mean, there was a big Congress there, a Continental Congress, and people wanted changes and edits. And so it did get modified in his first draft. I mean, there are some just striking passages in there where he rightfully blames the British crown, the King of England, for number one, not allowing these colonists in North America to stop the importation of slaves. There were several states, colonies. They weren't states yet. They were colonies that attempted to do that. Here's the rub. Those British slave trading companies and their ships were all chartered by King George III, by the British crown. And one of the things he promised those slave trading businesses was, you can go and take these slaves and import them to places like North America. We have British colonies. You can go and sell them there. There were several colonies that attempted to abolish slavery outright within their colonies. The king would veto these things. He wouldn't let the colonies do these things. And so that problem of slavery becomes more entrenched, and it gets stretched out. We end up with hundreds of thousands of more slaves coming from Africa into North America because of the British crown. And yet we have progressive Americans today who say America's shameful, embarrassing because of slavery, and yet gushing, fawning over the British crown. Right. The same crown, the British crown, right? It's a very strange thing.
You know, I'm not big on the British family, and I'm not big on following all the drama between Harry and William and all that. But almost to a point, if I thought he was doing it for any ounce of integrity, the fact that Harry gave up his royal lineage and he said, we're going to go move to America and we're going to go make something of our lives. Now, he got all kinds of privileges for being a member of the royal family and gets all the media and gets all of that. But hey, at least he gave it up. And at least he said, you know what, we didn't earn this, because the reality is, what has this guy ever done for anything of value for anybody that he should be entitled to the benefits that have passed down from King George III? I mean, 1751, before the revolution ever started, 1751, King George is negotiating with members of parliament as they're creating this sort of government to oversee the people. He says, okay, I'm going to let you guys profit off of the capital gains on our fortune, but you have to tax the people and pay us salaries. Right? I mean, in what world does he say, well, we've stolen hundreds of millions of dollars worth of billions, maybe, of dollars worth of fortune from our subjects for generations, right? Billions in 1700s or hundreds of millions in the 1700s. We've been taking, we're going to let you profit off of those as long as you pay us a salary in response.
I will say, here I'm going to add a little personal biographical story that's very relevant to this. So one of my former colleagues and bosses is Larry Arnn, who's now the president of Hillsdale College. But before then, he was out in Claremont. He was president of the Claremont Institute. And in particular, he spent some time in England. He actually worked on the official Churchill biography. And it's a very funny story. I think I can tell this quickly. Churchill's son had started working on a biography of his father. And he quickly realized Churchill was so voluminous. Churchill did so much. Churchill wrote over 9,000 newspaper articles. Those are just newspaper articles. He wrote for magazines. He wrote dozens of books. His letter correspondence was voluminous over his long life. And so it was clear this is going to be a multi-volume set. And he dies, and the torch gets passed on to Martin Gilbert, one of the leading historians in England. Sir Martin, this is now your job to complete the biography. And Parliament was running out of money. They're having all kinds of financial problems. This would have been in the late 70s, early 80s. And they said, you should finish this, but we don't have money for you. Go see if you can find some help. So Martin Gilbert starts searching everywhere he can, and he finds in Southern California is something called the Winston Churchill Society, and there's a phone number. Well, it's Professor Jaffe's phone number.
Right. The personal phone number.
It's his person, right? His home. And so Sir Martin calls, and Professor Jaffe, hello, in his typical grouchy voice. And they talk. And Jaffe chuckled. He said, well, look, this is just a little association here of some of my graduate students. We get together once a year on Churchill's birthday, and we toast and tell stories about Churchill. That's the Winston Churchill Society. He said, here's what I can do. I can send you some money. I think he sent him $5,000 of his own personal money. And he said, I'm not a wealthy man. I can't do any more than that. But more importantly, I can send you a form of slave labor. I can send you a graduate student, and you can work him right to the bones. That was Larry Arnn. And so Larry goes there and works for 3 years and comes back. No surprise, he ends up writing his dissertation on Churchill. He stayed very close with Martin Gilbert. Now Hillsdale College, I believe, houses all of Gilbert's papers. But when I've heard Larry talk about this many times, and he's right about this, and he's very good at this, is saying to understand the English way, we really got to step out of our own skins, and because we have this tradition of revolution, right? We have this tradition of a very clear founding on a set of ideas. We have these rights, and the whole purpose of government is to protect them, and all of that emerged out of a revolutionary act against another government, right? And the English don't have that. What the English have is they have centuries of monarchy and kingship and divine right theory of kings and kingly prerogatives, and this idea that individuals have rights and government should protect them. This emerges very slowly in the course, and very late in the course of English history, and it has often set those kind of individual rights have often been very they incompatible with the monarchy, and and that other part of the history. Sometimes it erupts in things like the English Civil War, right? These fights over what the government is and what it's supposed to do, and what privileges and does the king have, and all of that. And so it is good to sort of step back and just think about that history that the English have that we Americans don't have.
Yeah, well, they can say that all they want. There was a saying when I was growing up, and I don't know if people still say it. They're living a lie. They're living a lie. I mean, look, we have defined that there is a self-evident truth that all men are created equal. Yeah. They are living in a world where they're sitting and saying, this family is born better than all of the rest of us. We are not as good as them.
In typical Orwellian fashion, I think many English men and women and others would say, yes, Dave, all men are created equal. Everyone.
Except for them.
And except for them. They're kind of not equal.
I mean, based on what? And that's where I can't get
Yeah, you're right.
I feel bad that the world lost somebody who did care about people. She had a good heart. It seems like she had a good mind on her. She was a good person, and she had some great qualities and great characteristics.
Well,
and I don't want to.
Thankfully, she has a son who is wise and sober and smart, who's now going to take a. That's sarcasm for those who can't see my face. Could you imagine not working a day in your life and having to take your first job at 73? Yeah. And that job requires you to prove that you were born better than everybody else. Right. You are more. You are a better human being. You have more skills and ability than everybody else. Well, I mentioned another little piece I wrote on social media. My teacher, Professor Jaffa, who was a tremendous scholar of Shakespeare, and one of the central themes that runs throughout Shakespeare is this whole subject of monarchy. Mm-hmm. Many of his plays they involve kings and all the conspiracies, right, and drama revolving around that. And one of the subjects that comes out of Shakespeare's plays is the fact that a fundamental defect of monarchy is that it cannot provide both legitimacy and competency. It can't. Once in a while, it will provide competency. Once in a while, you'll get a king or prince who is wise, who's prudential, who's fairly competent at stately matter. Mm-hmm. But it's always illegitimate because the way you become king is you either get born into the right family, purely arbitrary, right? Or you pick up swords and gather some troops and you go slit the guy's throat who's the current king, and then you name yourself the new king, right? Which is not a legitimate way, right, of forming a government.
I mean, think about it this way. That would be like saying, okay, Tom, I'm going to walk into your house. I'm going to kill you and your family.
Yep.
And then the next thing you know, the deed to your house automatically transfers to me. All of your property is now mine. Forget going to jail. Forget anything else. I killed you in your house, so anything in your house now belongs to me. What kind of a world is that? Is that based on reason and truth?
Yep, it's true.
I can't get behind it.
Great credit is due, as with many other subjects, to the American revolutionaries for really doing more, I think, than anybody else to discredit the idea of kingship and monarchy. After the American Revolution, in very short order, around much of the world, the idea of a king started to become laughable.
Right.
It became, and once something is a source of joking and laughter, and right, it's been discredited. No one's taking it seriously anymore.
And to that point, right in the 1950s, Queen Elizabeth chose not to. And she had her reasons, and she talked a lot about God in her speech. So this was in a speech I referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. In the speech in 1947, she talked about she was not going to abdicate the throne. This was during a period where countries like Spain and France were giving up their monarchies, their kingdoms, their kingships in exchange and switching to a Republican form of government. And she wasn't going to do it. And she spoke a lot about how she's going to change the way it works. She's going to be focused more on service. People give her a lot of credit for not forcing her children to marry other lords or queens or kings, or how, I don't know how it all works.
It's hard for us to say those things with a straight face.
But
she had to have been really young, because I think she was only 26 when she became queen.
Right.
So that speech.
Well, this was right after World War II. She had just participated in however she did in World War II. But the one thing I did notice, I went back and I did read that speech, and the one thing I did notice is she consistently said, I'm going to be queen because it is God's will. She kept saying, this is God's will. Yep. God put me in this position, and therefore it is my duty. Now he has given me the clarity to improve the way we act as royalty, but he wants me to, it's the divine right of kings.
So Dave, I'm going to throw out something. We'll have to pick it up some other time because we don't have time now. And then I'm going to show you a really impressive pivot. So the thing I'm going to throw out is that was the exact same justification Southern Christian preachers and theologians offered for slavery.
Yep.
They said, you know why that black man is a slave? Clearly it's God's will. He was born into slavery. If that's not a clear sign that God wants him to be what else could we, that's direct revelation from God telling us that man's supposed to be a slave because he was born into slavery.
Yep.
And of course, not everyone bought onto that. Abraham Lincoln didn't buy onto that. Frederick Douglass didn't buy into that. So we'll have to pick that up another time. Now,
John Brown didn't buy into that either.
No, he did not.
And John Brown was convinced that God was telling him the exact opposite.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I mean,
it's a fascinating, that in itself is a fascinating drama.
God was talking to a lot of people about a lot of different things apparently at that time.
Yes, indeed. So Queen Elizabeth is kind of renowned for uniting England, being an object, something, a phenomenon that English people could share and come together about and agree upon to some degree. I think we had something like that in America as recently as maybe, 8-10 years ago, football. I would love to say baseball, but I don't think it's baseball anymore because I think interest is waning in baseball. I think baseball is too slow and thoughtful for the modern mind, the modern world. But a decade ago, millions of Americans positively loved football. And even people who didn't love football were sort of neutral about it. They didn't hate it. It was a kind of unifying thing before progressives came in and politicized football. And now football has become highly divisive. It's more politics than athletics. You watch some football. You're gonna catch me up here on what this, because I haven't seen football in a long time.
So this is interesting. I've continued to watch college football over the years. I still love college football. I have not watched professional football in a number of years, and I was with a friend, member of the Vino Veritas Society, this weekend.
Yeah.
And we sat down and we spent the day watching NFL football.
Were you drinking a vino?
Actually, no.
Oh,
took a nice just Sunday, relaxing Sunday.
Yeah.
And sat, had some good lunch and just relaxed. So first of all, a couple of observations about college football. We tend to think about these college institutions. This goes back to last week's podcast. I think it was last week that I talked about there's more to college than just academics.
Sure. I
went to the University of Colorado opening game a week and a half ago, and we're not going to talk about the game itself because I can't, the emotions can't handle it. They are so bad.
Okay.
But I saw something that gave me hope. I saw a packed stadium. I heard there were somewhere between 13 and 14,000 students in attendance. If you had asked me to guess, I would have said the number was even higher. They were packed in there, and the national anthem started playing, and they all stood up and sang along. Every single student was singing at the top of their lungs along with the national anthem. So for
those
all
are
of
students, I'm assuming there were many more.
And there were many more. The whole crowd nobody. I didn't see anybody around me sitting down. I didn't see anybody around me protesting or anything. Everybody. But the students were loud. They were singing along. They were into it.
Yeah.
They didn't sit there like you were talking about earlier and say, well, should I be singing this? Should I be? They were jumping right in. They enjoyed it. So I was happy to see that. I also did notice this weekend, the NFL starts this weekend. It's the first game, and it happens to be the anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
So a lot of the teams did some things to honor 9/11. Some chose to honor the Queen before they honored 9/11, which was interesting.
Yeah.
I was a little confused about why are we talking about the Queen of England on NFL football, but a lot of these teams brought out the flags that are 100 yards long, 35 yards wide, covered the whole field. And they did the national anthem. They did everything else. The teams aren't all coming out for the national anthem, which is interesting. But after we got past all of that,
does that mean some teams are and some teams are not? Or
you have
all of them stay in the locker room?
choice now.
Okay.
Of whether or not you want to come out, and certain players choose to come out, certain players stay in the tunnel, but they decided to just say most of the teams are going to stay in the tunnel, and a few players say, no, I'm not doing that. And they're allowed to come out and do their thing. And then I watched football, and I have been a lifelong football fan. And you've talked a little bit about over the years how you think football is not going to be a lasting sport the same way a tennis or a golf has taken hold?
I think football is a very modern, postmodern even sport that's poorly designed. It might be around for a while, but I think a symptom of being a badly designed sport is that they change the rules all the time, every season, because it has led to so many injuries and all kinds of bad things going on. Because I think it's a badly designed game.
I'm going to push that even further. I don't even think it's just because of the injuries that they're changing the rules. When you're not steeped in that tradition, when it wasn't just a developed game that developed before we got to this point, that is such a postmodern game, there isn't this sense of this is the way the game's been played, and we're gonna keep the rules the way they are.
Right.
They're constantly trying to figure out what dial can we turn here or here or here to get this to work.
And I'll add to, I mean, this is just this is a symptom. This isn't some big, what do we call it now, the root cause, just a symptom. The ongoing, concern with head injuries, CTE, everything related to it's very real. And there are people who play football, and I mean, it really messes with their lives and their heads and their mental health and all these things. And those, the people who run football, they would benefit so much from just taking a basic economics class and starting to think like an economist, and incentives. Helmets. They keep wanting to make the helmets bigger and stronger. Probably the best thing for football, get rid of the helmets. Yeah. Replace the helmets with the little leather,
go back to the old leather ones.
Because what players would do then is they'd be very conscious of their head. They would protect their head in a way they don't. You put on these expensive helmets, they think they're a missile and they can just put their head down and run into everything.
Now, the counter argument to that is a lot of the owners have said some of these players understand the dangers, and it's more important to them to go make the play than it is to protect themselves and be safe and be smart. Here's what I did notice, and I think this is a parallel. There's some symmetry between what I've seen in the NFL today and what's happening in America. Like I said, I've been a lifelong football fan. This has been, I grew up, we had Broncos season tickets. I went to just about every game. My friends and family will tell you when I was young, I could recite every stat of every player in football. I followed every play. I could sit here and tell you about things that happened in the early 1980s.
Right.
Still to this day. And remembering games like Ed McCaffrey the night before 9/11. The game of football has become, the quality of play in football has become drastically worse over the last handful of years.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is, as I have often spoke about how I don't like the monopoly of sports. Right. We did a podcast months and months ago, maybe over a year ago, called The Economics of Sports. And I talked about the monopoly of these leagues, that they have monopoly waivers from the federal government, that the government says you can operate as a monopoly as long as you meet certain requirements and you do certain things, like recognize a player union and things like that. And all of a sudden, we have now started to see the NFL operate in a way very similar to how we see the government and its public employee unions interact, like we talked about last week. For example, when I talk about the game has gotten worse, dropped passes. I saw more dropped passes yesterday than I had in months or for years. And they talk about how, because of the way the game is played and because of different things that affect player performance and health and everything, injury status, you get these players playing less during camp, during practice, during training camp. They still make fans go out and pay full price for these tickets to go to preseason games, and they don't play the starters at all anymore. I mean, it is not even, you do not see a single starter on the field. So when they go out and play game one, this is going to be the first time that you're seeing one quarterback throw to one receiver. And some of these guys are rookies. They've never even seen an NFL field before. They have no idea the size, the speed, the athleticism of the guys they're going against, because it's just such a different level than college.
Well, it's interesting. This is not a scientific sample. This is just my personal experience. My wife is a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. And I watched a little bit of the Kansas City. Who were they playing?
They played Arizona.
Arizona Cardinals. And I sat down, and after like 5 minutes, I turned to my wife and said, "Why can't these guys catch a ball?" It was amazing. I saw like 5 or 6 drop catches on both sides within just minutes.
And those are two of the best quarterbacks in football.
Yeah.
And they're not rookies. These are guys who have been around. They're two of the best quarterbacks in football. Their guys couldn't catch a ball.
Right.
And that was one of the better games played over the weekend. I mean, the Chiefs put up something like 44 points.
Right.
They played better than most. We saw a massive number of kickers miss field goals, miss extra points, especially in the last few seconds of games that would have either won or tied. The Bengals had multiple missed field goals, some in overtime, some in regulation. These kickers, they have one job, and because they're not practicing as often, and you sometimes start to wonder, where's their head?
Do you think are they missing these field goals, or are they getting blocked?
Mostly missing. There was one block that I can remember yesterday, but it's not even just the kicker. It's the snap. It's the hold. We saw in one of the games, the guy just kept snapping it high. The long snapper, I'd be shocked if he has a job today. Right. Because but those are things you don't practice in real life situations. Until you get into the game and they don't get these practices. Offensive line play in particular is something I've watched deteriorate over the years. And on Sunday Night Football, I watched the Bucs. Tom Brady is notorious for not getting sacked. Tom Brady is notorious for, he can read a defense. He was like Peyton Manning, right? He's not super mobile, but he can read a defense and he knows, I'm going to snap the ball. And if there's a guy coming, I'm getting rid of it quickly. He was getting sacked repeatedly. He was repeatedly getting hurried. And it wasn't that he was doing something wrong. There was no offensive line blocking. And I saw this across the league. And I've been talking about this across the league all the time. Offensive linemen, and for those who are not big football people, offensive linemen, it's like dancing together. You have to know where the guy on your sides are at all times, and you're working together. You cannot block a defense just, that's my guy and I'm going to go block him. It's a collaboration every single time, and you have to work in concert together if you're going to be successful. What happens if you don't practice enough?
Right.
You don't know. I mean, if you're going to be a good dancer, you go out and you practice all the time. And if you're going to be a really good dancer, you practice the same partner over and over and over again. So you guys know each other's moves. Well, so one of the things that happened years ago was the players union negotiates with the NFL and says, you're risking injury to us too often. So we can't have as many practices. They eliminated 2-a-day practices. Yeah. They eliminated requirements to attend off-season activities. They eliminated the amount of contact and the amount of days that they're allowed to wear pads. And all of that resulted in offensive linemen are getting a lot less practice. And what we're seeing is bad football because the offensive lineman can't block. And most people will tell you that's still the most important group of players on the field at any given time.
Right.
You watch this and I can't help but think, do these guys understand the value of what they're supposed to be providing? They're supposed to be providing an entertaining product. And I didn't find football this weekend to be very entertaining. I found college to be extremely entertaining. These guys are working hard. They're trying hard. They're looking to work their way to the NFL, work their NIL deals, get everything else along those lines. The pro guys, I got my contract. Are they more worried about the racial inequity on the field? Are they more worried about what commercials are playing? Are they more worried about who's sponsoring things? Are they more worried about what their agent is negotiating? I heard Lamar Jackson for the Baltimore Ravens turned down a $260 million offer over the weekend, which would have made him the highest paid player in NFL history. All of these guys, where is their attention? And do they understand? And then we have the same thing in society. Are you paying attention to your job? Are you trying to get better at providing value for other people and for the people who pay you? Or are you focused more on, I care about me and you owe me. I'm entitled to this. You owe me. Just give me what I want. And I want to go complain about Donald Trump.
There's one of the basic lessons in life that we've talked about on this podcast a number of times. It's the fact that living means working. If you want to live, you have to put out an effort. If you do nothing, right? You're born into the world, and if you do nothing, you will die eventually. If you want to live, you need some basic things like food and shelter and that requires some effort. And then if you want a better life than just mere food and shelter, well, you have to put out some effort. You're probably gonna have to produce some things other people value, and then they'll be willing to trade with you. And the great enemy what that little model we just described in 10 seconds, that is the recipe for improving the quality of one's life, is to be productive, to work. And the great enemy to all of that is the sense of entitlement, that attitude or mood that we might call it, that I'm entitled to things I didn't produce, I didn't earn, I didn't buy, that aren't mine, but I still feel entitled to. And I think we're seeing that crept across all industries. It's why businesses can't find people willing to work. Why should I have to work? I'm just entitled to a nice life.
Right.
Someone else should make my car payment and my rent and buy food. I don't think I should have to work. And even in these elite organizations like the NFL, I think we're seeing signs of that entitled attitude.
And there's a level of, you could be really skilled at something. It doesn't mean you ever stop working at it. Yeah. And the people who are really successful, who really figure out how to provide value and they make something of their lives and they're remembered forever, are the ones that have the legacy. They're the ones who don't just say, hey, I'm really good at this, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yep.
They're the ones who work at it every single day and figure out, how do I get better, and how do I get better, and how do I get better, and who can I work with to learn something new? And as you do that, that's what makes you valuable to society.
ESPN has come out with a special on Derek Jeter, which I'm a baseball guy. I'm a Yankees fan, so I've been loving it. And it's very similar. It's the same sort of model as the one they did for Michael Jordan a couple of years ago, which was also just, I recommend them both really highly. And you look at those two, and there are others, but those are two really high profile examples of people who they had more natural talent than in one finger than most of us had. And yet both of them worked. Yes. They outworked everyone around them. I mean, Michael Jordan was at the top of his game. He was the first one to practice. He was the last one to leave. When the rest of the team was done with everything, he would come up with additional drills and to hone his skills and reflexes and strength and speed and everything else. And Derek Jeter was the same way. Studied the game. He was always studying the game, always practicing. He knew that those guys knew that if they want more, they have to put out more effort.
We have to wrap up, but the perfect counterbalance to Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
One of the most talented people to ever step foot on a basketball court was Allen Iverson.
Yeah.
Allen Iverson has the famous quote, "We're talking about practice." He didn't show up and the press was giving him a hard time. And he says, "We're talking about practice, not a game. We're talking about practice." And he didn't think practice was important.
Right.
Allen Iverson never won an NBA championship. Yep. Michael Jordan won 6 and probably could have won at least 2 more if he didn't go try his hand at baseball.
Right.
So, I mean, it just shows the difference.
Yep. It's true. Well, Dave, this is why living as free citizens, as self-governing, virtuous citizens it's important, it's good, and it's really is the recipe for a better kind of life. And sadly, there are all these temptations out there moving Americans in the other direction. That's why we do what we do here. It's why we're so focused on the principles of the founding. It's why we are the guardians. We want to help people. We want to see people flourish and thrive and prosper. And they can only do that when they're responsible, when they're virtuous, and when they're free.
Absolutely. No sumus custodes.